Hey, everybody. Welcome to the 47th episode of the Writ Podcast. So the Conservative deadline for being a member eligible to vote has passed. There's going to be well over 600,000 members eligible to vote in this leadership race. We already have Pierre Poilievre claiming half of those. So to make sense of what all these numbers mean, today I'm joined by Chad Rogers of Crestview Strategies, Tim Powers of Summa Strategies, and Stephanie Levitz of the Toronto Star. Hey, everyone.
Hey.
Hey, Eric.
But this is the first podcast I'm doing since the Ontario election. So I'd actually first like to start with if there's any lessons from the Ontario election for the Conservative leadership race, or if they're too different, anything, that if you were a voting member, if you saw what happened in the Ontario election might inform your choice. Chad, you want to kick us off?
Well, if you said the post-COVID mood of a grouchy country, and the Conservative broader coalition being more prone to grouchiness than most, you would think that 2022 would be the year of incumbents paying a price of grouchiness, like we saw with the leadership review in Alberta that saw Jason Kenney resign. And there was no evidence of that in Ontario. So at least Ontario Conservatives, to the extent that the provincial voters for Doug Ford live in the federal coalition, they weren't unhappy with their incumbents. I mean, one member of a caucus plus adding, just under 10 more for an 83 under Doug Ford. It was a big win, and there just wasn't a lot of that post-COVID reactive. I'm mad at everyone for what I've been forced to live with. I don't like the establishment actor. I'll just side with whoever's the loudest or the crankiest. There was none of that sentiment living in Ontario. We saw in Alberta a few months back.
Tim, is there any real difference between the Ontario PCs and the federal Conservatives in terms of the makeup of the party and the membership, that kind of thing?
Well, Chad would know better than I. He's had more involvement, but let me pick up on his grouchy theme. And also, I think the lesson is don't be a grouch if you're a leader all of the time. And maybe there's a candidate in this race who wants to pay attention to that. Grouch and grievance works for a while. Look, the makeup of the PC party of Ontario, I think, is not entirely identical to the makeup of the federal Conservative Party for a whole bunch of different reasons. There are members of the Ontario PC party who fit comfortably in the Conservative Party, and the Ontario PC party attracted voters who vote Liberal from time to time, clearly. And the federal party has to look at all of that. I think one of the lessons from Doug Ford, and again, it's not entirely transferable with ease, is if you need to build some sort of coalition and some sort of alliances to succeed. When you delimit your voting pool, you delimit your chance to win. And I think Ford figured that out as best he could for what he was offering.
Stephanie, I don't know if you have any broader thoughts as well, but also I'm curious to people you've talked to if the Ontario election posed any problems for the membership or drives or any of the campaigns.
I mean, it certainly to some extent limited their tactical capabilities in the province for a little while. The idea of holding really big rallies like Pierre Poilievre had been doing earlier in Ontario, that would be a bit unseemly to be seen as, taking away any energy. On the converse, right, Doug Ford had told his candidates and members of his party to stay away from the leadership race, do not engage, do not help, focus on winning your own seats. And I think we might see a change now in the coming weeks where you will see members of the Ontario Progressive Conservative Caucus getting more engaged in the leadership race. So that helps, right? That there's a volunteer base, right? And a volunteer pool that was taken up with the provincial election. And now they can be free to do the super important work of the final stages of the federal race, which is, getting out the vote, helping raise money, all of these things that candidates really need. And GOTV really is crucial. Get out the vote. I mean, literally how these candidates will win with these membership numbers. And that's as important in big ridings with big membership as it is in smaller ridings, if not more important. So they need every volunteer they can get, especially for the campaigns that might not be raking in, the money to pay the staff that could also do this work.
So let's get to the numbers themselves. So Stephanie, the party came out on Thursday saying that there will be well over 600,000 members. We'll get a final count. It sounds like sometime next month. It does sound like they're going to only send out a final list of voters in quite a while. It seems like a long time for, I think if I remember the release correctly, said the end of July, they'll get that final list. Stephanie, what's your take on the size of these membership numbers, the claims that we've had from each of the party, and the fact that Poilievre seems to be claiming that he signed up half of these people?
So, I mean, starting with the overall number, the above 600,000 number, I mean, that is a record-shattering number for any political party in this country. Never mind a leadership race. Like, just set that aside. Like, we're talking about card-carrying, paid-up members of a political party in this country, and that's a fantastic number. And what I know this might sound a bit, dorky or overly naive, but in an era where people seem to increasingly lose trust in institutions and not trust the system and not want to engage, that you could get 600,000 people to pay $15 to buy into the system, I think is a really healthy sign. And you could argue that, well, the messaging that might be drawing some of them in gives some people pause and it's uncomfortable. But the point is they're opting in and they could choose to opt out. And I think that's great. And I think that all of the candidates in the party writ large are actually going to have quite an interesting time after this race is over, because there are 600,000 new members of the party, and the extent to which they remain active, the party wants them to remain active, how they leverage that, how it could change, the riding association boards, how it could change policy development for the party. Like, generally speaking, this is a really positive thing. And I hope that the party is thinking about that, thinking ahead about what do we do with these new members. In terms of which campaign signed up who, I mean, if you do a little bit of the math, if you say that Pierre Poilievre is claiming 311,000, Patrick Brown is claiming 150,000, there were about 142,000 paid up members as of the end of March. That was the last list the party had handed out. Okay, that takes you well over 600,000. So does that mean Jean Charest and Leslyn Lewis and Roman Baber and Scott Aitchison signed up 0 members? I don't think that's true. So, party sources have told me that they expect anywhere from 10 to 20% of the, let's say the claimed numbers to just be invalidated, which is to say multiple membership signups, problems with credit cards. So I don't know that the claims are wildly outstated. They're certainly outstated, but we're never going to know because the party will never release that final number of who sold what. I should say individually who sold what.
Yeah. Despite the Poilievre campaign asking the party to do that, maybe they knew they wouldn't, so maybe it was a safe thing to say. But Chad, Stephanie brings up something, saying this is a lot of new members into the party. How do you keep a lot of those people engaged? Because are they going to be donors after September 10th? Are they going to be, banging in lawn signs? Because it does seem like it might be difficult to get a lot of those people to continue to be Conservative members after their 1 year expires.
Well, Conservative membership is also something that peaks during the periods in which you need your membership card. So the actual reminder to pay your fee and be a paid up member as opposed to just stay on the list peaks around leadership. So there is a soft sine wave that occurs on a peak membership number when you've got to have a membership to participate, like in voting for a convention, big policy moments, leaderships, party processes where they test your membership at the door, versus the year where you might be able to forget in the middle of a mandate or in the stretch. So I wouldn't read the up down as inorganic or as a sign of people walking away in a huff or saying, wow, that wasn't worth the $10. I think the Conservative Party has really been the first in Canada on keeping small dollar mobilization, member mobilization high, and the New Democrats in second place. And I think this membership number also really puts the nail in the coffin that the Justin Trudeau Liberals were right to end paid membership and the connection with the party as a means of growing their overall activist base. I think they went in one direction and tried one experiment that if I were the executive director of the Liberal Party today, I'd be looking over at the revenue and the list growth that the Conservatives have achieved organically and be awfully jealous of it. How do you keep people involved? You talk to them, you listen to them, you reach out to them regularly. For those who are cursed with being on the Conservative Party text and email lists, you know that they do that pretty well and very frequently. But let's build on Stephanie's point on mobilization, right? We have 338 electoral district associations in Canada. That's what we call what Tim and I as boys used to call ridings. The riding associations now have roughly 2,000 members apiece. Now, there are areas where that goes up and down, but I grew up in a conservative party provincially and federally where a third of the ridings were moribund. If they didn't have a member, if they hadn't elected a member in a while, you had to go kickstart them every campaign and hope they came back to life. There just aren't dead ridings in the federal Conservative Party anymore. It's amazing. To me, as someone who grew up, with a 2-seat party, the last thing I'd say is Big Tent works. Having people who disagree on a number of things but agree on some fundamentals, it works. Big Tent looks to outsiders like a family brawl, but it's kind of, my husband's family is from a different ethnocultural background than I am. And when we gather for family meals, I think they're all screaming at each other. Apparently they're just talking. That's a difference. That's kind of like outsiders looking at the conservative race and confusing in a big tent when people choose to argue about a few of the things they disagree on. They forget that there's a bigger thing holding them all together in one club that they agree on. Small government, lower taxes, principled foreign policy. Those fundamentals kind of hang true, and people think the party delivers on that it's a worthwhile enough club for representing the things they agree on, and that the leadership is the time when you scrap about the areas where you disagree to hold some space so that you get some voice in a future cabinet or a senior critics bench or in a platform.
But Tim, do you think that the 150,000 people that Patrick Brown claims have signed up, if Poilievre wins, are they going? How many of them will think that they're still in the same tent?
No idea. We won't know but I got to pick up on Chad's point. I love that stitching of what a happy conservative family is. Such a happy family that people are calling each other liars and suggesting they have major character flaws. It's a unique family for sure. The Brady Bunch, it is certainly not. Whether it becomes the Brady Bunch, we'll see. So to your question, Eric, look, whoever wins this thing is going to have to do work. Both Chad and Steph have alluded to that too. Find that common ground that Chad framed so nicely and perhaps optimistically for those who will feel dislocated now. They feel part of something now. They feel like they're part of an exercise to get their person to win. And they're engaged in all of that, but there will only be one winner. So those who were in other camps who came on board for the person that they championed are going to need to be spoken with and dealt with and reached out to and made to feel like there's still a place for them. That is the biggest challenge, finding a chord that a new leader will have, because yes, there have been healthy disagreements, but they've been pretty personal as well too. And that leaves a sting, not just for the candidates, but for the people who support them.
But if I can just jump back in, like the Tim does a lot of charity work that we all admire. And if you sit on the board of a not-for-profit charity, or you sit down with a development director of a charity, they estimate the cost of acquiring a monthly donor. So let's use that as a proxy for a member in a political party, someone who's likely to donate small amounts, someone who's likely to pay you once a year and stick around beyond the mailing list. The cost, according to Imagine Canada, in the not-for-profit space to acquire a monthly donor is about $375. So when you see those street canvassers who are out trying to get you to sign a clipboard, or people phoning you, it is not insignificant to have an exercise that onboards and freshens a list with 600,000 plus people. Absolutely. This is like, there's not a hospital foundation in the country who isn't having a meeting going, how do we do what they just did? Because it's different and it means more. So before we debate the negative, we've got to kind of stand back and say, holy smokes, does wide participatory democracy ever work? And remember, unlike the Americans and unlike the UK, where our conservative traditions come from, we created this Democratic Party tradition organically when Dalton Camp decided to try and take out Diefenbaker. This whole notion of a democratic franchise of parties, the other parties in Canada took decades to follow the Conservatives. The UK still hasn't finished doing it. The caucus gets the vote down to the last two. The Americans have a highly regulated gerrymandered system of primary. So this notion of democracy on the party side, not just on the general election side, it really pays a dividend. It's worth appreciating as a case study, because most of our analogous Western partners don't do it this way.
And in this case, a $9 million dividend. So that's not a bad return.
Yeah, that's one thing I think the Liberals would probably looking at. But, Chad, I don't want to get into the history too much, but I wonder if people within the Conservative Party wonder if Dalton Camp started off something good for the Conservatives, considering that they've often have a lot more trouble internally than externally. But let's actually talk about the leadership paths now. So Poilievre claims 300,000, Brown claims 150,000. Charest claims he has the points, and it is a point system, so that really matters. You do have to win points in every riding. It's not about running up the numbers in Alberta. And you can see from Poilievre's claim numbers that he's overrepresented in Alberta, underrepresented in Quebec, but in all likelihood, every other candidate's probably running into some of the same stuff. But Stephanie, we can start with you. Based on those numbers and based on the claims from the various candidates, where do you think everything stands up now? Is this Poilievre's now to lose on the first ballot?
You know what? It's so hard. I mean, it seems like it. Right? Math, look, I'm in the writing business. Math is the thing that sends me screaming and running in the other direction. You're the numbers guy, Eric, not me. But when you just look at the numbers and you look at, if he does have, let's say, he's got members in every single riding in the country and more of them than any other candidate. And I would suspect that there are candidates like Leslyn Lewis, for example, who may in fact have a majority of members in her support in Saskatchewan, in Manitoba, in some of the ridings in the West. And you can see a bit of that in Poilievre's numbers maybe, but it seems like it ought to be, but there are 6 candidates on the ballot. We can't discount Leslyn Lewis. I mean, her campaign is not releasing membership totals, but she does have a very strong following. One of the, anti-abortion groups, has claimed, for example, that they alone have sold 6,000 memberships in this contest, like not for any particular candidate per se, just of their own moxie. So where do those voters go? And that's something we don't, with this total number, again, there was some number of memberships that were sold not directly through any candidate, right? So where do those members line up and where they go? So mathematically, does it appear to be Poilievre's on the first ballot? It looks like it could be, but there is Leslyn Lewis, there's Patrick Brown and Jean Charest, and where their memberships line up. And I don't mean to discount Roman or Scott Aitchison. They will have some measure of support that will maybe preclude Pierre from an easy first ballot. But I mean, I don't expect Pierre to have, I'm picking a number, like 32% on the first ballot, right? It is winner take all. For him to be well above 40 on the first ballot does not seem unreasonable at this point.
Chad, you were nodding. If I recall correctly, Lewis got about 45,000 votes on the first ballot. So you can already imagine that, at least there's that chunk of voters who are probably going to vote for her again. So right there, that's a big chunk of those votes. But Chad, what do you think? Is this, are we heading towards the first ballot? We got 3 months to go.
Look, you never even want to tempt yourself with that, because I remember in the 1997 federal leadership of one of the precursor parties, the Progressive Conservative Party, where Joe Clark, it was clear at the end of that race with Joe Clark's return to federal life that he was going to win. And he ended up coming out, I think we were 48.7, and then had to sustain the process for 2 more weeks because he was that shy of 50. Joe was always bad at getting close to the number he'd target for in a few points and causing... But to Stephanie's point, there's a couple of numbers things that I'm going to wait until the delegate trackers start their work and the list starts getting worked over in the next 3 to 4 weeks. One is, where does the overlap account for renewals between that 142 that was there when everyone started and where they nested in the 142? Who's claiming what rate? And my guess is Poilievre had the bigger, quite insurmountable lead amongst the party as it existed the day the starting pistol was fired. Number 2, there are apparently whole lots of membership that were submitted with different forms of payment. So there may be as many as 20,000 members out there that were submitted with things like Canada Post money orders, which were not aligned with the rules, that may be thrown out en masse. That may change. And I don't think that was the Poilievre campaign. I think that was one of the others. So the only thing I'm debating right now is 1, 2, or 3 ballots. Who's in second place, Lewis or Brown? Yeah. And I can't figure it out until I know more.
Yeah. And also, you're Stephanie, I agree with you, 32%, they're not going to end up there, but you do wonder about Poilievre's growth potential if he's somewhere around 44, and you have Baber drop off first and then Aitchison, and they don't all go to Poilievre. So it takes several ballots before someone with enough votes to really decide it ends up winning it. But Tim, what's your take now on the state of the race?
Well, this Poilievre campaign wants you to think they have it on the first ballot. I mean, it's a clear strategy they're embarked upon right now, trying to perhaps move people who are in other camps. They've moved 2 MPs. That doesn't mean anything, by the way. It makes a great story for the media to suggest, and yes, thanks, Steph, you did a good job there. That there is momentum for Pierre, and that's a win for them. But I just don't, based on what everybody has said here, I think it's really hard for him to win on the first ballot with all the contingent factors. And again, the public may be hearing this and hearing, there's 600,000, he's got 310. Well, maybe that's a first ballot victory. It doesn't work that way. As we all know, it's not a 1-for-1 sort of system. So I don't think this is done in a first ballot. I'd be very surprised if it was.
Also, we can't discount the fact that up until they get this final list, Leslyn and Roman, and I'm going to reference them in particular here, they have not had a chance to reach those people that Poilievre has signed up. And there is, I don't know how much time there will be to really do that persuasion and conversion, but you saw Leslyn and Roman try and do it during the debates, right? Where they went after Poilievre, especially on the question of mandates, how he responded to the trucker convoy, and sort of started to poke holes in his claim of superiority on this file with Leslyn and Roman. I mean, look at Roman Baber, literally lost his job standing up for this. And so if you're someone that Pierre signed up on the strength of that narrative, and there's probably a certain chunk of his new members that did, once they start, if they start engaging with Leslyn, if they start engaging with Roman, they may say, oh, I like them. Okay, well, they're more legitimate. They're more authentic. And it's not that I don't like Poilievre, but you know what? And then do they rank down ballot, right? That's the other thing. I don't have the numbers in my hands, but in the last one, not everybody ranks down ballot. So there, it could be that a bunch of people just vote for Roman and then they walk. Or they rank Leslyn number 1 because they're drawn by her authenticity. They're drawn in, but then they look at other things and say, this is a vote. I'll use an analogy actually. In the 2017 leadership race, we all remember dearly departed Deepak Oberoi. And Deepak was such a voice for encouraging the party to be more inclusive and more open and really respond. And Deepak had no hope of winning, none whatsoever, right? But a number of senior conservatives said to me that year, they were ranking Deepak first. So to send a message, to say that this voice matters, that this, and I think there's similar things that will happen with Roman and Leslyn, that they get the number 1 as a point, and then the number 2 is Pierre, or the number 3 is Pierre. And so that's where it also factors into this. Maybe it's not a first ballot, but it gets there eventually.
Well, and there's a keyword that was just used there too, time. Look, there's 3 months. It's probably 2 months until people vote. That's many, 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 many political lifetimes. Not just for those who are voting, but those who are competing against each other. So again, you saw this strategy by the Poilievre campaign saying, look, we've got it, let's just move on, was the argument effectively, but neither Brown nor Charest are taking that bait right now. I don't imagine this is going to turn into some kind of cuddle fest between now and when voting breaks out. So there's going to be more blood on the floor. We have seen through some of the advocate stuff that we did, as you know, Eric, that after the English language debate, where the English language debate, there was a bit of slippage for Poilievre. Will there be another debate? I'm sure the Poilievre campaign doesn't want one. Others are challenging for one. Party ultimately decides. It's their fiduciary responsibility. So how does that all play out? That element of time, because it's the strangest thing. So we have this great moment of 600,000 voters, and now everybody just waits, pauses, stops. Strange, very strange.
I'm just in a mood today to fight with Tim about things. So I'm going to propose the counterfactual cuddle fest argument. Because I
look forward to this.
I think as a known cuddler, Pierre now has to greet Roman and Dr. Lewis with a big hug. He's got to follow. If you noticed, a couple of members of caucus led by Garnet Genius came out and were very specific and said, Leslyn will get their number 1, but Pierre will get their number two. So they've been laying a strategic track that, frankly, the Poilievre campaign should have been more aggressive on, in saying values voters, stand up and make a point on values voting, that it deserves a voice, it deserves a place, that you have a number in the party that can't be ignored, but vote for someone who's going to be prime minister. So that's going to restrain Poilievre, at least in terms of Dr. Lewis and Roman Baber. He's going to want to give them a hug every single day of the week. I think with any leadership, though, that goes on for a number of weeks, there's two forces organically that you're going to watch for that are invisible like gravity. One is momentum. Campaigns have it or they don't. Doug Ford just had a campaign where from mid-campaign onwards, he had momentum. Part of the story being told every day was, looks like this guy feels like he's winning. And that momentum builds on itself. And when you have the reverse of momentum, there's nothing worse than the toilet swirl on a campaign. It's just soul crushing every day to try and break through and prove that you might be winning when everyone thinks you're not. But the second is the bigger story when you run for leader as opposed to something else, is you have to demonstrate emotional and personal growth. There has to be a story arc from the start to the end of how did you get ready for the big job? How did you demonstrate in personal narrative, things you learned, how you picked yourself up when you screwed up, how you growth. So for me, I'm going to take the positive version of what the 2.5 months can bring, is the candidates have an opportunity to do a little bit of the emotional growth work that the member acquisition phase didn't allow them when punch-ups were required, because you had to move fast to get members. But I think that anyone who wants to win, and if that's the Poilievre campaign now, they've really got to campaign for those number 2 spots.
Stephanie, I saw you shaking your head a while ago when we were talking about the potential of a debate. I guess if you are Poilievre, you don't want that. In the same way that Ford wanted the campaign to be low event, low risk, Poilievre wants the next 2-3 months to go with what Chad just said, that everybody just says, oh, he's got it in the bag. I guess we don't need to worry about anything else.
Yeah, I think that's it. I think that's even on the record, right? I mean, you had recently, the party does reserve the right to hold a third debate. I should say it's not coming out of nowhere. It's actually baked into the rules of the contest that if they wanted, they could have one at the end of August. And, in the last several days, you've had 5 of the 6 campaigns very vocally say, I'm in. You want to do another debate? Bring her. And you've had one that hasn't. And that one is Pierre Poilievre's campaign. And it's interesting, to Chad's point about Dr. Lewis and his need to give them a hug. One of the interesting roles I think Dr. Lewis plays in this race is she is the only one who can challenge Pierre Poilievre, which is to say, he cannot whip around and attack her, slander her, challenge her credibility. And he can't do that for a number of different reasons. There's some are more political than others, but I think she could play such a role in this race at holding Pierre to account, because the debate stage is the only place where Pierre Poilievre is being held to account in this campaign. And what I mean when I say that is, this is not me whining as a member of the media that he's not doing any interviews. He can work his process, right? Candidates are allowed to work their process, and that's one thing, okay. But when he had been holding these big rallies and all these thousands of people, he wasn't taking questions. The membership wasn't given any opportunity to say, hey, what about this thing, and what about this issue that's really important to me? And I understand your big freedom narrative, but I really want to know about this issue in my riding or something that makes a difference in my life. There's no public challenge of Pierre Poilievre. The only person on that stage who can play that role without getting attacked in return is Dr. Lewis. Mm-hmm. And so I find that interesting, and the role she could play, even, I'm not trying to say like take him down a notch or whatever, but just hold him to account. And on the debate stage, that is possible. And of course, Mr. Poilievre is not interested in that. That is not part of his narrative, right? His narrative is, I am going to save your life, and also everything bad happening to you right now is not your fault. And that's a pretty powerful narrative. But why would he want to be challenged, right? Why open himself up as the front runner to anything more? And, to your point about, Chad, about the narrative arc, right? I mean, it seems many observers would argue that Pierre is actually going in like the opposite direction, that like he's entrenching and taking positions that lots of folks say the Liberals are just going to weaponize that in 3 years. Why would you do that? Why would you say that? So it'd be interesting to see if he does try for some kind of redemptive narrative in the other direction now, to not moderate. No one expects him to pivot. That's been fatal for other leaders. But what does he do to now start talking to those other members of the party? Or does he think he even needs them? And if he doesn't, if he's dismissive of that, I think that's to his peril as well. I mean, whether or not Patrick Brown wins, if Patrick Brown did in fact sign up 150,000 people from ethnically diverse and equity-seeking communities that are willing to give the Conservative Party a chance, that's pretty profound. And Pierre has to speak to those voters. I think he just has to. Also, in the name of forming government in the next election, because you have to start thinking about not just this leadership, but how you're going to do this for the next 3 years. You can't be Mr. Grump and Gripe for 3 more years. That's not going to cut it.
Well, Eric, can I just add this point too? There is the party here. What do they want to do? I mean, as has been proven so far, they've had this exercise that has harvested this historically large list that has brought in $9 million. What do they want to do for the next 3 months, right? How will they exercise their fiduciary responsibility to the members? Does that mean, as we're talking about another debate, what else does it? Because you can't just have 3 months of nothing now until September 10th. You can have the campaign sparring at each other a little bit, but the party has to find some vehicle, some process to channel and captivate and retain the momentum that Chad was talking about earlier. And they're very capable people on this LEOC team, and Ian Brody's over there. I'm sure they're thinking about it. Yes, they want to make sure the counting and everything works on September 10th, and there isn't an embarrassment there, but they need to fill the void for the next 3 months.
That's a really good point that Tim makes. Like, it's befuddled me slightly that the party itself didn't embark on more of a membership drive, which is to say, like, to how, that civic education piece that Poilievre's campaign has talked about needing to do, that people don't understand, that in order to elect the next leader, you have to buy a membership. And the party, you would think, could have done that on their own, right? Said, hey, you want to say and who's best poised to defeat Justin Trudeau in the next election, come buy a membership at the Conservative Party. Now's your time. Because by the time that person is elected, if you don't like them, I'm not, maybe you guys say this to the people in your world. I certainly do. Like, it's like, no, you need to understand, like, if you want an option, if you're inclined to vote for this political party or any in the next election, and you don't like who one of the leaders might be, then take out a card and vote for the person you think you might want to cast a ballot. You're not signing away your soul. You're signing away your email address for all time.
Well, you are signing away your soul, Steph, because you're going to get bombarded with emails the rest of your life.
But there's also the unfortunate reality of parties don't necessarily stand with independent professional corps that stay in place. Yeah. And the party in recent years has had to deal with multiple changes of leader, multiple new personnel trying to stage up, trying to run leaderships. And, O'Toole's, the incompetence that got O'Toole fired as leader extends to how he ran the party.
Yeah, no, that is true. And that, Candace, I mean, it's an interesting role that the interim leader has been setting for herself, Candace, right? I mean, she obviously didn't have the same runway that Ronna did. Like, Ronna had a number of months in Stornoway to do a lot of work, right? That was a longer leadership race than this. But again, you think about, okay, Candace, like, you've got the last summer, these are your waning days in Stornoway. What could you do, right?
Let's also remember, under Candace's brief watch, she didn't do the two things Ronna did: reduce the number of active party members and active donors, and see a decline in the polls simultaneously. The Pax Romana of Ronna Ambrose is what Conservatives used to tolerate and call success, which was the supervision of decline. Ronna had no significant check marks in her favor during her time as interim leader.
Okay, but look, let's say, and I guess we'll finish on this. So the party has had, in terms of its internal strengthening of its membership, a good few months. It's now up to 600,000. That's amazing. Lots of new money coming in. But has the race itself been good for the party? There was the questions that a lot of the positions Poilievre has taken might become problems later on for a general. Is it better for the party if they just say, we got these 600,000, let's be happy with that, and not rock the boat for the next 3 months? Because it might be, like, I'm not sure if those debates were good for the party. Chad, you're shaking your head, but I mean, I saw lots of potential future political ads that could be pretty damaging, the same way that Stéphane Dion and Michael Ignatieff had lots of stuff that ended up being damaging for them later on.
The extension of that is only if you believe that the 32% or more of Canadians who support the Conservative coalition and the 600,000 who stepped up to be involved in the process care about the conventional mainstream view of things. Pierre Poilievre, in a tight leadership race, decided to talk about the sexiest of sexy political issues, money supply, and the role of the Bank of Canada. I mean, we haven't seen that since the coin affair in '62. I encourage everyone to read Renegade in Power if they have a minute. And what was the response of mainstream media and the Liberal NDP party? They said, you are not allowed to talk about this. They didn't say you're wrong. They didn't say, we don't agree that the job of the governor of the Bank of Canada is the controlling of the rate of inflation. They said, you are not allowed to have those views. You are not allowed to criticize that person, despite the fact that this is a man named Tiffany who campaigned to not have a daycare on his street because he thought 80 children would disrupt the historical nature of his neighborhood, right? The circumstances outside of this leadership, be it issues of a gun control bill that is because of things that happen south of the border in a non-analogous gun safety market, or just the effete people running Ottawa these days who've decided after COVID they're going to keep going with a new version of their job, which is telling everyone what they have to think and how they have to behave. That is a fertile territory for a Conservative leadership and anyone who wants to make a new pitch on an alternative.
I don't know. What do you guys think, Tim? Has it been as good as Chad is suggesting?
His full name is Tiffany.
That's nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with Tiffany as a name.
That's right. My full name's Timothy, not quite Tiffany, but it's Timothy. I think a slightly different view on the debates, Eric. Yeah, I think they look, as I said, there's been some empirical evidence that they did hurt Poilievre. But equally, if you're Pierre Poilievre, yeah, the normal strategy is to duck and play out the lead and win and do all of that. But I'd almost say I want one too. He's going to need the practice and the experience. He knows where he's made some mistakes. He's not a stupid person by any stretch of the imagination. And for the party, I mean, when you're being talked to, there's that old maxim that all publicity is good publicity. Yes, there's some dangerous stuff in there. I think that I'm going to stand up for Tiffany Macklin and say that, that's ludicrous what Poilievre's talking about. And by the way, Chad, on the coin affair, you may not know this, but my grandfather resigned in support of Governor Coyne. He was the only governor on the Bank of Canada who refused to vote him out. And Conservatives will drive them batty to learn this. Governor Coyne's gift to my grandfather, George Crosby, for his support was Andrew. Andrew became my grandfather's godson. So there you go. So this is very personal to me. Stop roughing up the governor of the Bank of Canada. Anyway, Eric, I don't know.
I hope the folks who write the Politico trivia just caught all that, because that's the deal breaker question a year from now.
Well, and even better, Eric will like this. About a year and a half ago, my mother found a letter that Joey Smallwood had written to my grandfather, telling him what a courageous decision he had made. Now, for the real history buffs here, anybody who knows the history of Joey and Diefenbaker, Joey was no fan of Diefenbaker, so anybody who stood up against Diefenbaker in that manner was found to be unique. Anyway, Eric, back to your question. The party needs to do something. Have a frigging debate. Pierre, go out and do it. Try it on. It certainly is more beneficial probably for Mr. Charest and potentially Patrick Brown. But who cares? You cannot just sit on your arse for 3 months.
While we're on the topic and we're running late on time, so I'll try to keep it. But I've seen lots of similarities to me between Diefenbaker and Poilievre in terms of their historical path or political path, and also potentially what a Poilievre government might look like in terms of the Diefenbaker government. A little note there that Diefenbaker did not end up winning very long after the coin affair. So you can have a lot of passion and partisanship when you come to power, but if you don't know what to do with it and your government looks a little bit directionless, voters can recognize that. So anyway, that's just a editorial aside. Now we'll finish with this. Every time at the end of the podcast, I've been asking for the front runner, the challenger, and the wild card, though I think now we're just more or less saying the third person in third. For me, last time it was Poilievre, Brown, and Lewis. I think that's probably still the case, because I imagine Charest has points, probably not enough points, and might fall off and help Brown. But Stephanie, I don't know if you want to give us some who you think the 1, 2, 3 is, or at least the perceived 1, 2, 3 from the people you're talking to.
I would say that the perceived 1, 2, 3 would be Poilievre in 1 and Brown, Lewis, some. She might be 2, he might be 2, she might be 3, he might be 3. There's no sort of, I would say, consensus view of all the folks I talked to on that question. And I would also just point out, not even from the Poilievre camp, like when you talk to them and say, okay, who is the number 2? What are you thinking? You know, I hear a lot about Lewis and I hear a lot about Patrick Brown, and it depends. And you can see again, I mean, they attack Patrick Brown as the day is long. That's a bigger thing than this race, but that's for another podcast, you know? And then there's Leslyn Lewis and sort of the challenge she presents to them.
Tim, last week you had it as Poilievre, Brown, Charest. Any change there? Or last time we talked, it wasn't last week, but last time.
That was a long week if it was a week, Eric. I'm going to stay sentimental with Charest at number 3. Just sentimental in my heart, as I supported him in that 1993 leadership when I was 6 weeks old.
We were both there. We were babies.
Yeah, Chad was still kind of baby-like.
Yeah, Chad, last time you said Brown, Poilievre, you didn't know who was first or second, and then you had Lewis in third. Any change in that?
I think today it is Poilievre, Brown, Lewis. And the real question for me is the strength of Baber and the strength of Charest. Because if Brown hopes to change his position, he actually needs the Charest campaign to be weaker than it's saying, because he needs Charest knocked off sooner. If Charest is actually in third, there could be no transfer of his ballot to help Brown if the Poilievre number is true. So single transferable ballot, I'm getting into kind of the geek math where you have to draw a chart and connect lines and the like. But I think if the numbers are true right now, it's Poilievre by a significant jump ahead. And if it stacks out that it is then Charest, Baber, Aitchison, then I think the outcome doesn't have a lot of swing left in it unless there's a dramatic under mobilization or difference. For instance, if Dr. Lewis's supporters all show up differently than the other campaigns have a standard rate of show, no show, and there'll be a lot of delegate tracking and people working phone lines to figure that out in the next month or 2.
Yeah, it'll be 3 months to go, so still lots to happen. Might seem like foreordained, but yeah, lots to go still between now and September.
Tim and I in our home provinces, let's just take the fact that the entire province of Newfoundland and Labrador and the entire province of PEI combined are what just signed up to be members of the Conservative Party. Like, it's crazy.
What would that look like if the Conservative Party was only made up of Newfoundlanders and Prince Edward Islanders?
It'd be one hell of a party for the party, guaranteed.
Fun. And when the bill comes, there'd be nobody left in the room. They all would have had to go home a half hour before.
And it's all the gatekeepers over in Ontario they could pay for.
Yeah, damn gatekeepers. You're all troublemakers.
Yes, Laurentian elites. Okay, well, thanks so much. And we'll see what happens over the next 3 months. So I really appreciate you 3 coming on today.
Thanks so much. This was fun.
Thanks to Chad, Tim, and Stephanie for that discussion. And as always, if you like that video, please subscribe to this YouTube channel. Please share the video around. And I'll see you next week.